Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe as a background info, so I studied chemistry, and then also I'm always interested in chemical engineering, so I lead a reaction engineering group since more than 20 years, and we did high throughput experimentation a lot where we built setups and of course had to deal with data. Not that perfectly like in NFDI4Cat now or in NFDI in general, but in general, so I have a lot of background in this direction and now try to apply what I have learned in the past. So in NFDI4Cat, we started in the first phase of the consortia. So we had our review meeting, and I have a few slides as an introduction where we are. So the NFDI4Cat tries not to focus only on a material and around the material, but we try to look at catalysis as a discipline, which means there's a research part, there's an upscaling part with a lot of engineering, and then there's also application in the industry. And this catalysis is just such a universal phenomenon that you find it everywhere. Yeah? So it's in CO2 conversion, biomass conversion. So everywhere it's used, and which means that we have to somehow bridge a lot between the disciplines in order to work. And also people working in catalysis have the problem that nothing fits because they have to look at so many different stuff, and then special solutions from one discipline never cover enough to describe catalysis. Okay, so in principle, there are a lot of important key aspects for the future that we have to address and where catalysis will play a big role, like in this food supply, agriculture, energy, mobility, and so on. You know this. And so what do we try to cover in our consortium? So we have here more the lower part, the research part, where we produce catalysis data from synthesis to operando spectroscopy, just standard performance data where we measure the catalyst under reaction condition, characterization information on the sample, then we have synthesis information and so on. And there, in this area, I think we are closer related, or is it? Does not work well. Okay, we are close related to in the synthesis, for example, especially for homogeneous catalysis with NFDI4Chem. Here with the characterization, especially in Z2, there's a close link to Daphne for NFDI. And then, of course, when it comes to calculated data, then FAIRMat is quite important. And also heterogeneous catalysis is especially addressed in FAIRMat. And there we have also a good connection. And then we leave, in principle, the area that's covered by other disciplines and go to more the reaction engineering side. And there, I think there's no other consortium because the engineers, they don't care for chemical influences. They just produce and run machines. But if it's chemical machine, it's not their business. And then we come even bigger to a process scale where then you have to combine all this. And the idea is, a standard catalyst development has to go through all these phases or a catalytic process, and it's very difficult to transfer data from one to the other. But it's important to design the process that you have already performance data from lab experiments. And so by integrating everything, we hope to bring some benefits to the catalysis community. So like I said, we are now at this 4 years breakpoint where we defended now the next phase as well. And as a consortium which could not start from a tool like you could with FAIRMat and NOMAD, the tool which you continuously improve, we had nothing like this to start upon. So we don't measure, for example, data downloads or data volume, but we measured our success after the 4 years about like how many people we could address in our meetings, what kind of outputs we generated, and so on. And about the tools and services we developed, I will talk a bit more. So we have a lot of tools developed in principle. Probably some will die, so they were ordered in different areas. So like we have a little bit of training and education. We have principle developed a school system which could run from few hours to some days, and that can be given at, I don't know, like for example, the International Catalysis Meeting conference, we gave a 3-day workshop, but it could be also just a day course. And that's a flexible set of modules that you can put together to give people an introduction to research data management. And then we have a lot of other tools, which are some just local. Local means for one institute, it will solves just the local problems, and it's installed, of course, at different institutes. And then we have more like basic and advanced services like ELN-like systems, and there are quite a lot of this. And then we have other tools like central services, which the vocabulary, for example, the data portal, and so on. And like I introduced some of them a bit more. So on top, if you look on the data organization, we have a meta portal. And this meta portal retrieves catalytic data from our central repository, but also from other repositories. So this can interface, for example, to Nomad, and it also retrieves heterogeneous catalysis data from Nomad, and it interfaces to Zenodo and retrieves data sets from there. So this is a place where you can just search over a lot of different data archives for catalysis data. And then this is mainly a search index. And then for sharing the data from our community, we have now a central repository running. It's not, I mean, it's running, it's all running with backups and so on, but it's, for example, not perfectly integrated yet with ontology annotation or with complete authorization from the NFDI. So there we need to do a little bit more. And then we have local repositories in the institutes. This would be like your OASIS sharing then to Nomad. So this would be like the OASIS parts. But there we have a lot of different systems. One, for example, is the BuzzCat portal. And BuzzCat is a TU Berlin repository, ELN-like system, where they decided to explore if they could use a data sharing tool like Dataverse as a kind of ELN. And so they also added some more tools for visualization and this. And Dataverses, or these portals, they have the way to communicate the data between each other. So it's no problem to directly import or export into the main repository, and it's no problem to transfer the metadata to the meta portal, because these systems are standard compliant, and they can just talk to each other without any further work. And also the meta portal just uses standard communication standards. So you could also retrieve city data from Berlin about bicycles traffic in some street or something. Yeah. So it's based on this European data standard for the city data and state data. And then we have different ELN-like systems that were developed. For example, Adacta is a system from KIT where you can record your experimental data from more complex lab setups, and they give you an easy overview about the data. So it's, and also about the equipment. So you can connect the state of an equipment. Did you use one mass flow controller for oxygen for a whole time, then you replaced it, so you track the history of the setups and of the data. And it's combining this together, which is beyond what typical ELNs do. Then we have a tool like Carmen, where you can do a lot of kinetic simulation. So there you have this workflow ideas in principle. You model kinetic measured data with, compare it to different models. And then this kind of, the Carmen local system, again, can report the data to the central repository. And then there's also one very interesting system. It's LaraSuite. It's for a robotic platform for high-throughput biocatalysis experiments, which has a full workflow scheduler to run all the robots working together like a production pipeline. But it works and it's in use, but it's very difficult for another lab to directly copy. Okay, then also, like I said, the meta portal is our connection to the other repositories where we could easily already retrieve information for our community. Then a similar picture like you saw in the talk before for Matwerk. So our idea is the same. We want to connect over the different steps in this research pipeline via semantic or ontology information and building knowledge graphs. And for this purpose, we developed several things. For example, we have a reaction for cut ontology, which connects reaction to catalyst information. Then there is a pipeline, a semantic enrichment pipeline, which helps to annotate papers or texts with the concepts defined in the ontologies. And it can also help to identify gaps in the ontology. Then we produced, before we started, an overview about how much you can reuse from existing ontologies for catalysis. And there was nearly no overlap, which justified that we start with our work. And then there's more, like we are currently developing with NFDI4Cat a schema to share data in a consistent way across the consortia. Then there's voc4cat, this domain-specific terminology I will talk about a bit more. And we also have developed a handle-based PID service where you can give samples a PID which is then unique. And you don't have the DOI costs, for example. So now I come to vocabularies. It was already introduced in the talk before. So the idea is that we want to assign the concepts that we have in our discipline to a uniquely resolvable identifier. And if you can do that, then you can build knowledge graphs out of them. And then they are very useful for AI, for all kind of, just data analysis work. And what we also said, we want to be standard compliant, because then you can reuse tools and others can reuse what you do, and we want to reinvent as few things as possible. The other point is, before we started, there was, like I said, nearly nothing available, and also, no vocabulary and very sparse coverage of the discipline in ontologies. And so we decided to develop a vocabulary, because typically you don't want to directly go into full ontologies. Ontologies are super complex, also very difficult to develop to avoid contradictions. And so for many applications, thesaurus is enough. For example, if you have chemi, this chemical species ontology, it does not have to be an ontology. They just decided to develop it as an ontology, but it would better be a thesaurus. Like, for example, all plants from the United Nations are in a vocabulary. They are not in an ontology. And so this was our level where we said there we want to enter into the semantic world. But the problem, again, if you try to find tools which can be used by normal users, they are not available. There were just some special, difficult to set up Java tools where you could develop these vocabularies together. And so we decided that we need to do something. And the key thing is that we needed a more user-friendly contribution process. Yeah? So we don't want to have 2-3 people developing it, but we want to set it up in such a way that if a researcher misses a term, they can just do it without having to invest weeks of ontology learning. And so we said we try to combine Excel, where everyone is familiar with the idea of open source contribution workflow. And so we have a relatively simple Excel sheet where you have then the concept IRIs, which are worldwide unique, and then you define your terms. In principle, you can define different languages. You give definitions of the terms, and you can also link different terms together in broader, narrower relationships in a relatively easy way. And so learning this does not take much time. It's mostly self-explaining because you have some already existing definitions, so it's easy to continue. And then from the contribution, it's made in such a way that people download the Excel file and then create a pull request where they put the Excel in some kind of inbox folder. From there, it's extracted with a pipeline. And this pipeline does a check of the Excel, converts it to SCOS, which is the standard for the vocabulary, validates the vocabulary with shackle shapes, and then also creates a documentation for the updated vocabulary. And of course, like it could also fail when there's a problem, then the user gets notified that in the upload there's some problem. But in general, then there could be, then there's a review. We can comment like that the maybe definition should be more precise, or it's already there and we don't need it anymore, and something like this. And in the end, it will be approved and then merged into the existing vocabulary. What is interesting here that we also, at this point, we remove Excel. So Excel never enters the repository. In the repository, we just have SCOS files, and Excel is just temporary there in the pull request. Then the end, so this is the result. This is then uninteresting for the general user, but this is just the machine-readable version of the vocabularies complying to the SCOS standard. And there you see there's the identifier on top for this term, photocatalysis, I think it's, then there's a definition, and there could be different languages. Now it's just for English, and this term can then also be part of collections or part of a hierarchy. And if you call, I mean, from this IRI, you are redirected then to the human readable HTML documentation, and by retrieving the content type, you can decide. So it's the same IRI, and if you call it with HTML, so the standard content type, then you get the HTML information. If you use the content type XML SCOS, or then you get the machine-readable form. So there's a same IRI where you can decide what you want to use it for. And it also has a, in principle, a tracking of releases, and we all keep everything available. So you can really refer to a concept defined in this version, or you can decide you want to always refer to the latest or current release. So it's in principle for software people, it's not new, but we try to transfer as much as possible here to the vocabulary world. So why do we need it, and what is it used for? In principle, we have normally, like what people report are standard tables, and of course they have no semantic mapping to the ontologies or vocabularies. And then what we would do, we would in principle replace a local ID by a PID for cat, where then you can correlate like the synthesis which led to this sample with characterization information, which is also linked to the same ID. Then you can replace certain methods, for example, by an ID for the method, which is defined in voc4cat, the general term, for example, incipient wetness impregnation or such a term. And then also like organic compound, citric acid, then can be linked to existing ontologies. And with this linking, then you get this additional information from KB ontology, and there you can, for example, find out citric acid is a chelating agent, and then you can start your search. It's not by citric acid, but you ask for all syntheses which use chelating agents during the process, and then you get a lot of additional positive like connections by integrating the ontology. Okay, so this is in principle the information that you get from KB, how the citric acid is linked to all other compounds or compound classes. Then NOMAD was one of the first, also other consortia which picked it up, and Julia and Schumann and Michael Goethe used it for different applications. Julia defined a heterogeneous catalysis schema, and in the schema she edited links to the definitions in voc4cat. And so when you export now, then you have already a way to build knowledge graphs with this additional information. And I think this would be one way, like if you have in your schemas more ways to map, and you put it in the schemas directly, then you have something which in the export everyone else who lives in the semantic data world can reuse. Okay, and also here's an example how Julia's result looks for heterogeneous catalysis. And what we do there at the moment is that NOMAD And this heterogeneous catalysis part, we try to interface with the BuzzCut system, which is a dataverse system, and try to combine the data from both systems in a data evaluation. And this is done again by Julia Schumann and Annette Trunschke. And so, okay, this is just a summary, like for the NFDI4Cat. So we have also guidelines which help to decide, for example, should you do plural definitions? Should it be somehow separate words or one word? And so you can find them on Zenodo. And then voc4cat tool is a Python package which helps in the conversion from Excel to SCOS or from SCOS to Excel. So it works both ways, and that also allows us to do these workflows. And then what we also created is a template. So if another discipline wants to copy this, it's relatively easy to set up. And now some European Union projects contacted us, and from the Material Digital Initiative, they are interested in maybe reusing this. So we will see. Okay, so in principle, one last slide here. One key thing also is how will these systems survive one funding period. And so this is also, voc4cat is simple enough that we could just build it upon open tools and open available technology. So we have, in principle, the whole vocabulary is CC0 licensed, so it's no problem, someone else can take it over. And we only use open tools, which are all on GitHub. And we also do the open hosting on GitHub, and it worked. Initially, we had it on GitLab. Now we transferred, so we know that it kind of works on both systems. So it would be very easy if Microsoft changes the costing, then we could just switch over to another system or to Git or these kind of installations. And also, it can be just transferred. I mean, like some people now from your consortia are interested, and then it can be just shifted over to the next one without big problems. So, and all these ideas, they have been just recently summarized as a 03 idea by Charles Hoyt, and Benjamin Giori, so in a scientific data publication. Okay, then, thank you.